dead men don't usually smell like sulfur, unless they made a deal they couldn't keep. The rain had already washed most of the blood away by the time I arrived. Downtown alley. Flashing blue and red lights caught in puddles. The kind of night that made even the coffee taste like an autopsy. I ducked under the tape, flashed my badge, and ignored the rookie trying to tell me I'd ruined my shoes. They were already ruined. So was the case, probably. The body lay against a brick wall, eyes open to the drizzle. Male, late 40s, dressed too well for this neighborhood. No wallet, no watch, and no signs of struggle, except for the marks burned into his chest, looping symbols that looked less like art and more like regret. Who found him? I asked. Janitor, doing a cigarette run. Someone answered. He says the guy was just sitting here. Then he wasn't. Typical. Death never sends invitations. I crouched, snapped a photo, then leaned closer. The smell wasn't just decomposition. It was wrong. A low metallic tang under the sulfur, like ozone or electricity that remembered a storm. My gloves brushed over the marks again. They weren't carved. They'd grown, skin raised and melted, as if the flesh itself had tried to spell something on its way out. "Do not touch that," a voice said behind me, smooth and amused. I turned. He didn't belong there. Too clean, too calm, too dry for the rain. Tall, maybe late 30s, with a dark coat that fit like it remembered the shape of his body. Black hair swept back, silver-gray eyes that made every neon flicker look deliberate. He smiled like someone who'd read my file before saying hello. "You're contaminating evidence," I said. "I'm preserving it," he replied lightly. "You just don't have the right kind of gloves." I straightened. "And you are..." He reached into his pocket, slowly, theatrically, and held up a small black card. No name, no phone number, just an embossed seal burned into the paper. The lines shimmered faintly, like cooling metal. "Consultant," he said. "Temporary assignment. Not through me," I held his gaze. "And not through any channel I recognize." He tilted his head. "Recognition is overrated, Miss Quinn. You smell like reason. It's almost offensive." "Excuse me?" He crouched beside the body, ignoring every boundary of my crime scene, and traced one of the burned sigils in the air. Not touching, but the candle flicker from a nearby shop window dimmed as his finger passed. "Runes," he said. "Debt markers. Old design." I didn't answer, because if I did, I'd have to admit I saw it too. The faint, curling shimmer around the dead man's chest, like heat haze over asphalt. "You shouldn't be here," I said finally. He smiled again, slow and infuriating. "Neither should he." I stepped forward. "You're under arrest." "Of course." He rose smoothly. "Just let me know where to wait." I'd hate to miss my own interrogation. And before I could reply, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound. Just the faint trace of warmth where he'd stood, fading into the damp air. I exhaled. "Fantastic," I muttered. "A magician with attitude." The rookie appeared again. "Detective Quinn? You good?" "Peachy," I said, crouching again by the body. "Tell CSU to bag the scene and run a heat residue test. Something's cooking here." When I reached for my pen, something black slid from my pocket and landed on the pavement. The card? I hadn't even seen him put it there. I turned it over. L. Voss, special consultant. No contact info, just that same burned sigil. Faintly warm, like it was breathing. The drizzle thickened, washing blood and certainty alike into the gutter. I pocketed the card and looked up at the alley walls, the shadows shifting in patterns that didn't belong to the wind. For the first time in years, I felt something colder than the rain run down my spine. The next morning smelled like overbrewed coffee and wet paperwork. The precinct buzzed with that particular chaos of too many detectives pretending to be awake. I'd been up all night cross-referencing our John Doe with missing persons. No matches. Just a growing headache and the lingering sulfur scent on my gloves. No matter how many times I washed them, When Captain Royce called me in, I expected a reprimand. Instead, he gestured to the glass-walled conference room. "Your new consultant's waiting," he said. I froze. "My... what?" "City request. Someone from upstairs wants outside expertise. Play nice, Quinn." I already knew who it was before I opened the door. Lucien Voss sat at the table like he owned the place, immaculate dark coat draped. Over the chair, sleeves rolled up just enough to look accidentally perfect. He had a cup of coffee in front of him that he definitely hadn't poured himself. "Good morning, Miss Quinn," he said, as if we'd scheduled brunch. "Or should I call you Mara? You strike me as a first-name professional." "You strike me as a problem," I replied, dropping a file on the table. "Who approved this?" "Someone with exquisite taste, apparently." His smile curved. "You're welcome." "You think this is funny?" "Not funny," he mused, leaning back. "Adorable. Like a cat trying to cuff a thunderstorm. Great. You can explain that to internal affairs when you're done being poetic." He ignored the jab and slid one of my case photos closer. "You missed something." I crossed my arms. "Impossible. See that curve?" He pointed to a faint mark near the victim's collarbone. "That's not writing. That's a mark of debt. It connects to a binding clause." I cut him off. "You're talking like this is some kind of contract law." "It is," he said simply. "Just not human law." I stared at him. "You can't honestly expect me to believe that." "I don't expect you to," he said, eyes glinting. "I expect you to see it. And you will." He stood, collecting his coat. "Call me when you find the next body." "I'm not calling you at all." "Then I'll save you the trouble," he said, already halfway to the door. "They'll find it before midnight." He was right. By the time we got the call, another victim, same symbols, this time carved, into marble instead of skin. The precinct was in full storm mode. But Lucien didn't show, not at the scene, not at the morgue, not anywhere, until he did. It was nearly midnight when I got home. The rain was soft now, tapping on the windows like a warning. I tossed my coat on the chair, kicked off my boots, and went for the kettle. "You should really start locking your door," said a voice from the dark. My hand went for the gun on instinct, but he was already leaning in my kitchen. Doorway, tie undone, holding a half-empty glass of something amber. "Lucien, breaking and entering, now?" I snapped. "Classy." "Technically, I'm consulting," he said, "just expanding my workspace." "How did you even get in?" He smiled. "Doors are suggestions." I pointed the gun at him anyway. "You have 10 seconds. Relax," he said, unbothered. "If I wanted to hurt you, you'd already be an interesting memory." "Comforting," I muttered. "Why are you here?" "To warn you," he said, his tone suddenly stripped of humor. "Don't look for the killer. Look for the contract." I frowned. "The what?" "The first signature binds the soul. The last one collects the debt. Whoever you're chasing isn't killing out of impulse. They're balancing ledgers." "That's insane." "It's accurate," he corrected softly. "And dangerous." Something flickered across his face, not amusement, not arrogance, worry. For me, maybe? I didn't know which idea was worse. He stepped closer, the light from a single candle catching in his eyes. A heartbeat. I saw the reflection twist. Firelight burning not gold but silver white, too bright to belong to anything human. I blinked. The glow was gone. Lucien set the glass down. "You've seen enough now to start doubting everything you thought you knew, Mara. That's good. Doubt keeps you alive. And just like that." He walked past me, opened the door without touching it, and disappeared into the rain. The candle guttered out. In the dark, the smell of sulfur returned, faint, familiar, and almost comforting. Rain again. The city hadn't stopped crying since the first body. By the third victim, I'd stopped pretending it was a coincidence. Airbus Security, same corporate logo on all their contracts, same protection clause that meant nothing to human lawyers but apparently quite a lot to demons. At least according to my uninvited partner, Lucien Voss. We were back at the scene, an upscale apartment, with too much chrome and too little soul. The air smelled of perfume and ozone, and the lights flickered like they didn't want to be involved. Lucien paced slowly, hands behind his back, eyes scanning every inch like he was reading a book only he could see. When he stopped, he crouched and pressed 2 fingers against the marble floor. "You talk to the walls now?" I asked dryly. "They talk first," he murmured. "Sure they do," I said, scribbling a note. "And what are they saying?" Help. "We're haunted by bad interior design?" He smirked. "You'd be surprised. Marble holds memory, pain leaves patterns. So does greed." I exhaled through my nose. "You do realize this is an official investigation, not an exorcism?" "Semantics," he said. "Same paperwork, less honesty." He moved closer to the window, where rain trailed down the glass like veins of silver. "She was afraid at the end," he said quietly. "Not of dying, of being collected." I looked at him sharply. "Collected by who?" He turned to me then, expression unreadable. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try me." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "That's what I'm afraid of." We spent the next hour cataloging the impossible, symbols burned into the curtains, a floor, tile still warm to the touch, a lingering hum in the air like a low electric prayer. Lucien moved through it all like he belonged here, like the world itself was his lab. I wanted to hate him for it, but part of me couldn't stop watching the way he looked at things, not with curiosity, but recognition. When we were done, I turned to him. "So what's the verdict, consultant?" He shrugged one shoulder. "She made a deal. Protection for power. Debt came due. Meaning?" "Meaning," he said, stepping closer. "Your killer isn't killing. He's collecting overdue souls." I laughed once, short and sharp. "You know how that sounds, right?" He smiled. "Like the truth?" That was the problem. It did sound like truth, and I hated that. He saw it in my face and grinned wider. "You're starting to believe me," he teased. "I'm starting to believe you're clinically insane." "I'll take it," he said. I don't remember who moved first, but one second we were arguing, and the next, I had him pinned against the wall, gun at his chest. Rain thundered outside, wind rattling the balcony doors. "Enough games," I said. "Tell me what you're really doing here." He didn't flinch, didn't even look at the gun. His voice dropped to something lower, darker. "You can shoot me later," he said softly. "Right now you're shaking because of me, not the gun." The words hit harder than the thunder. For a moment I couldn't breathe, not from fear but from how sure he sounded. I forced myself to step back. "You're lucky I don't cuff arrogance as a crime." "You wouldn't find a cell strong enough," he said lightly, but there was something else in his eyes. Something raw, almost human. We didn't get time to unpack it. The power cut out. A second later, the windows blew inward. Glass rained down as the world erupted in sound. A trap triggered the moment I'd crossed the floor. Flames roared where the runes had been, twisting up like serpents. I stumbled back, but Lucien was faster. He caught my wrist and pulled me toward him. For a split second, everything froze. The light, the sound, the fall. And then reality bent. Dark and light coiled around him, cracking through the air like a storm caught inside a heartbeat. For an instant I saw him, truly saw him, not a man, not human. Something older, brighter, and terrifyingly alive. His voice, when it came, wasn't entirely his own. "Stay behind me." The blast hit, but didn't reach us. It couldn't. The air rippled, the fire curved, and the room fell silent except for the whisper of ash. Lucien dropped to one knee, breath ragged, the faint glow fading from his skin. I stared at him, shaking. What was that?" He smiled weakly. "A bad habit." I knelt beside him. "You saved me." He looked up, eyes no longer silver, but a muted gray. "Don't sound so surprised." For the first time, I wasn't sure if I was terrified of him, or for him. He wasn't human, but neither was my curiosity anymore. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. By now, the whole city smelled like rust and old confessions. The trail led us to the industrial district. Warehouses stacked along the river like tired giants. Erebus Security had a facility here once. Now, only ghosts and tax write-offs. Lucien and I moved through the darkness, flashlights slicing through mist. Every sound felt amplified. The drip of water, the hum of streetlights dying one by one. He walked ahead, coat brushing against his legs like shadow, even wounded. And I suspected he still hadn't fully recovered from whatever he'd done at the apartment. He moved with infuriating grace. "You sure about this?" I whispered. "No," he said. "But since when has certainty ever stopped you?" "Cute," I muttered. "Try bleeding less sarcasm and more answers." He gave me that smile again, the kind that made me want to punch him, and then immediately apologize for thinking about it. "If we find what I think we'll find, you'll have more answers than you want." Inside, the warehouse was a cathedral of rot and silence. Broken crates, shattered glass, faint moonlight filtering through holes in the roof. And everywhere, paper, torn contracts, hundreds of them, scattered like dead leaves. I crouched, lifting one with gloved fingers. Ink smeared, signatures burned through. "Protection agreements," I said quietly. "Every single one of them." Lucien's expression darkened. They were promised safety in exchange for obedience. But when the collectors came, they didn't pay. "They couldn't," he said. "The fine print always wins." Before I could respond, the sound of metal clicking cut through the silence. Then, chaos. Gunfire tore through the shadows, ricocheting off concrete. Lucien shoved me down behind a crate, his hand hot against my shoulder. "Stay here," he ordered. "Not happening." "Mara?" I'd already fired twice, taking cover behind a pillar. Figures moved in the dark, human shapes, but their eyes glowed faintly red under the flashes. "Subcontractors?" I shouted. "Debt enforcers," Lucien hissed. "Hired by Erebus." "They don't miss." "Neither do I snapped, right before a bullet grazed my arm. "Okay. Maybe once." Lucien raised his hand, and for a heartbeat, the world trembled. The air thickened, turning the gunfire into muffled echoes, like sound itself obeyed him. Then a sharp crack split the spell. He staggered, catching his side. "Silver." I saw the glint just before he fell to one knee. Smoke hissed from the wound, and his skin flared with faint light. "Lucien." I grabbed him by the coat, dragging him behind a pillar as more bullets sparked overhead. He gritted his teeth, voice rough. "Touching me now might kill you." "Yeah, well, watching you die's not on my to-do list." I shot back. "You're insufferable." "Thanks. Now shut up and move." He didn't argue this time. We found a maintenance hatch behind the storage shelves and stumbled into a tunnel beneath. The warehouse, narrow, damp, lit by dying bulbs that buzzed like angry bees. Lucien was heavier than he looked. His skin burned through his shirt, the wound searing faint trails of smoke into the air. I half-carried, half-dragged him to a dry spot near the junction. He tried to speak. I glared. "Don't. Save the dramatic last words." He smiled faintly. "You'd make a terrible demon." "Good. I already work with one." That got a real laugh out of him. Soft, broken, but real. It echoed off the tunnel walls like the first honest sound of the night. I tore a strip from my sleeve and pressed it to the wound. The heat nearly blistered my palm. He winced, jaw tight. "That's silver. It doesn't heal easily. Guess we have something in common. Pain tolerance? Stubbornness." He looked at me then. Really looked. The sharp amusement faded, replaced by something quieter. "You shouldn't care this much," he murmured. "It makes you a target." Then maybe they should be careful who they aim at. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tunnel hummed, and water dripped from the ceiling like a clock counting down. When he finally slumped sideways, exhaustion winning. His head came to rest against my shoulder. I froze, not because of the weight, but because it felt human. His breathing slowed, each exhale brushing my collarbone. I could smell rain, blood, and something else, like smoke that forgot how to hurt. Outside, the sirens grew faint. The night held its breath. And in that impossible quiet, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. He wasn't just the chaos I'd been trying to understand. He was the reason I hadn't given up trying. The world didn't explode the next morning, but it felt like it should have. I hadn't slept. My coat still smelled like smoke and river water, and the city outside my window pulsed, with that same uneasy rhythm, like something under its skin was waiting to move. Lucien was gone when I woke up. No note. No message. Just silence. And silence, I was learning, was his most dangerous kind of answer. The precinct felt colder that day. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the looks. Quinn, Captain Royce barked from his office. You'd better explain why internal affairs just flagged your case logs. What? I stopped mid-stride. Why? Half your evidence files were leaked to the press. I blinked. That's impossible. Only I didn't finish the sentence. Holt, my partner. He'd been quiet lately. Too quiet. And Jamie, our data tech, had been acting like she was walking on broken glass around me. The moment I saw her in the corridor, I knew. She avoided my eyes. I'm sorry, Mara. They offered me money. I didn't think. You never do, I said, voice cold enough to frost metal. Get out of my sight. She flinched, but I didn't care. The damage was done. Everything we'd built, every thread, was unraveling. That night, I went back to the warehouse site. The rain had stopped, but the ground still stank of iron and regret. Lucien was there, leaning against a rusted beam, hands in his coat pockets, watching the city lights ripple on the river. You left, I said. You were safe. That's not the same thing. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes tired. It's better. I stepped closer. You know something, don't you? About Holt. About Erebus. He hesitated, which was how I knew I was right. Mara, he said quietly, this isn't your fight anymore. Oh, that's rich, I snapped. You drag me into hell and then decide I'm too human for it? I'm trying to keep you alive. By lying to me? His expression hardened, the warmth vanishing. You don't understand what's coming. Then explain it. I can't, he said, because if I do, you'll stop looking at me like I'm still something you can trust. The words hit like a bruise forming under my ribs. I opened my mouth to answer, but another voice cut through the air. Touching, it said. Smooth. Polite. Poison-wrapped incivility. A tall figure stepped from the shadows. Impeccable black suit, pale gold hair slicked back, a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Seraphine. Even his name sounded expensive. She's the perfect host, Lucien, he said, tone almost admiring. Why waste her on morals? Lucien moved instantly, stepping between us. Stay out of this. Seraphine's smile widened. You're losing your touch. Chaos with a conscience? How poetic. I reached for my gun. You two want to start using real words anytime soon? Seraphine's gaze flicked to me. His eyes weren't eyes. They were mirrors that showed too much. Humans and their questions, he said. So noisy before they break. Lucien's voice was low. Don't. Oh, please. Seraphine sighed. You can't protect her forever. You'll burn out trying. You always do. Something passed between them. Old, sharp, unspoken. Then Seraphine tilted his head, as if hearing a private joke. When the time comes, she'll choose. They always do. And with that, he simply stepped backward. And was gone. No smoke. No shimmer. Just absence. I stood there, pulse racing, rain finally starting again. Who was that? I demanded. Lucien didn't answer. He just stared into the river, jaw clenched, shoulders tense like a man waiting for lightning. I understood then. He wasn't the storm. He was what came after it. Tell me the truth, Lucien, I said. Were you ever on my side? His eyes met mine, and for the first time I couldn't read them. Not arrogance, not amusement, just pain. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I was. It wasn't enough. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, alone in the flicker of dying streetlights, the smell of rain and sulfur curling around him. Behind me I heard him say something to the night, maybe to himself. Trust, he murmured, is the most fragile lie we tell ourselves. The church was supposed to be abandoned. That was the first lie. By the time I pushed open the heavy doors, the air was already burning. Hundreds of candles flickered along the cracked altar, their light crawling across symbols carved. Into the floor, the same spirals of ink and blood I'd seen before, only now complete. In the center of it all stood Holt. My partner, my friend. And the killer. He turned when he heard me, face calm. Almost peaceful. You shouldn't have come, Mara. Yeah. You'll have to forgive me for not trusting the man carving ancient death runes into holy marble. His eyes were wrong. Glossy, dark, not entirely his. Do you know what it's like, he said quietly, to watch people die around you, to try to stop it, and realize you're next? You made a deal. I had to, he hissed. I was dying, Mara. I begged for a second chance. Erebus gave it to me. But no one told me what they'd take in return. I raised my gun. Then tell me who you're working for. I'm not working for anyone anymore, he said, voice breaking. I'm just trying to run out the clock. Behind him, the shadows moved. And then Seraphine stepped into the candlelight, immaculate as ever. His smile was almost gentle. How touching. Mortals still think bargains can be broken by bullets? I turned the gun on him. Try me. Do you know what makes humans so easy to manipulate? He said softly. They mistake choice for freedom. Don't move, I warned. He ignored me and gestured toward the sigils. The symbols pulsed, alive now. Veins of fire crawling up the walls. The contract ends tonight, he said. But I need a vessel. Holt's soul is spent. You, however... His eyes met mine, bright as glass. You'll do nicely. A low growl echoed from the doorway. Lucien. He looked like he'd walked through the apocalypse to get here. Soaked, limping, eyes burning faint silver. Step away from her, he said. Seraphine smirked. Ah. The prodigal chaos. How sentimental. You were warned what would happen if you interfered. Yeah, Lucien said, taking another step forward. And you know what? I never listen well. The air warped. Candles flared white. Lucien raised a hand, and the sigils cracked like glass under invisible pressure. Seraphine's calm shattered. You're breaking the binding? Someone has to... You'll burn? Lucien smiled faintly. If chaos must burn to save her, let it burn. The world split open. Light erupted. Not gold, not flame, but something purer, searing straight through the bones of the church. The sigils turned to ash midair. Holt screamed, and then there was silence. Just the sound of fire breathing, and the echo of something ancient dying. I ran to Lucien, but the heat stopped me, too bright, too alive. His coat flared, edges dissolving into smoke. He turned his head, eyes blazing with something almost human. Mara, he said quietly. You were the first thing I didn't want to destroy. Don't, I whispered, reaching out. Don't you dare. He smiled, that maddening, infuriating, beautiful smile. And for a second I thought he'd make another joke. Instead, he said, Remember what I told you. Doors are just suggestions. Then the fire swallowed him. The candles went out one by one. When the light finally died, I was on my knees, ash in my hands, the smell of sulfur fading into rain. Outside, the storm had ended. The air was still, almost clean. Lucien was gone. So was Holt. The church stood silent, broken, like something had been ripped out of the world and left behind an echo. I stayed there until dawn, waiting for the echo to answer. It never did. The city didn't stop for the dead. It never did. A few weeks after the fire, the reports were filed, the ruins cleared, and the church quietly condemned as a gas explosion. Neat. Clean. Nothing supernatural about a crater where faith used to live. I wrote my final statement alone, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Case unresolved. Subject unknown. It felt right. The truth didn't belong in the system anyway. Some things you don't submit. You survive. The precinct coffee tasted worse than usual. Royce told me to take a vacation. Jamie sent an apology email that I deleted unread. Holt's name was already gone from the department roster, like he'd never existed. That's how the world heals, by pretending it was never sick. I walked the streets instead. The rain was lighter now, almost gentle. People laughed. The neon signs worked again. The city was alive, scarred but breathing, like all of us. I stopped by a cafe I hadn't visited in months. Small place, cracked windows, good music, terrible service. The kind that stays open even when everything else shuts down. I ordered coffee I didn't really want and sat by the window. The steam fogged the glass. A while, I just listened. Rain against the awning, distant sirens, someone laughing 2 tables over. It felt almost peaceful. Almost. Then a voice said, "You still drink that toxic swill you call coffee?" I froze. The cup slipped in my hand, clinking against the saucer. That voice, too amused, too precise, too alive. I turned. Lucien Voss stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his hair, a coat, too ordinary for him, and a pulse where there hadn't been one before. He looked human, tired, real. But that smile, that same infuriating, impossible smile, was still his. And, "You still appear uninvited," I said softly. He stepped closer, shaking rain from his sleeves. Old habits die hard, especially when you don't. I stared at him, heartbeat stuttering somewhere between disbelief and fury. "You were dead." He tilted his head. "Technically, yes. Briefly. Terrible experience. 0 stars." I laughed, a dry, broken sound that turned real halfway through. "You're impossible." "So they tell me." He nodded at the chair across from me. "Is this seat taken?" I gestured with my cup. It was. By my peace and quiet. He smiled, slow and warm. "I'll keep it company." We sat there for a while, saying nothing. Outside, people hurried through the rain, umbrellas blooming like black flowers. Inside, it smelled like burnt espresso and second chances. He finally said, "You look different." I stopped sleeping with a gun under my pillow. Progress. I studied him. "So what now, consultant?" He looked out the window, eyes catching the faint city glow. "Now, I try being mortal. See what all the fuss is about." "And me?" He turned back to me, smile softening. "You keep me from getting bored?" I rolled my eyes, but couldn't help the grin tugging at my lips. "You'll regret that." "Already do," he said, and reached for the umbrella leaning by the door. Outside, the rain had picked up again, that fine silver drizzle that made the whole city shimmer. He held the umbrella open. "Coming?" I hesitated just long enough to feel the weight of everything behind us. The fire, the lies, the miracles, the almosts. Then I stood, stepped into the rain beside him. He held the umbrella. I held his hand. We walked down the street in silence, the city lights melting into reflections around us. And somewhere between thunder and laughter, I thought, maybe hell isn't a place. Maybe it's the moment you lose someone and realize you'd burn the world to bring them back. And maybe heaven is what happens when they come back anyway.